Hey everyone, welcome back to our place. We are super excited to have Sarah White today. Sarah White has been an attorney for over 20 years and is come highly recommended to specifically help special needs families with guardianship. We've heard from a lot of you guys that it's a very hot topic. Should you do guardianship? When do you start that process? And Sarah is here to answer all of your questions. So thank you so much for joining us, Sarah.
Sure, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So let's jump right in. So a lot of families that we've talked with, their kids are maybe in that high school range, 16, coming up on that big 18-year-old birthday. And they're kind of wondering, when do you even start the process of guardianship? And is it something they should be thinking about now?
It never hurts to think about it now. Legally in Georgia, the soonest you can file is exactly 6 months before they reach their 18th birthday. So 17 and a half. Typically, when I prepare paperwork to file, it can take a couple months. Now it's pretty quick to do, but it requires a couple signatures from people outside the family, and sometimes people procrastinate. And so to me, it doesn't hurt to start maybe a couple months before that 17 and a half birthday, but then you can't file until then.
Okay. And then let's take a little bit of a step back too. So some families, especially who have maybe younger kids, are going, what is this? What is guardianship? When do I need to be thinking about this and stuff? So walk us through a little bit of like what exactly it means to have guardianship of your child when they hit 18, I believe it is.
Sure. So when your kids are minors, obviously you're their guardians. They can't enter into contracts, they can't decide where they live, they can't decide where they go to school. You're the boss of them. When they turn 18, suddenly they get all kinds of legal rights that they may not be equipped to handle. So suddenly they can enter in, like I said, enter into contracts. They can decide where they live. They do all the communicating with their doctors. They decide where they go to school. And so if that's not ideal, if you're in a situation where that's not ideal and your child is not equipped to do that, then you can file for guardianship. And it legally strips those kids from those legal rights and gives them to the guardian.
And does the child have like any say in it? Do you ever see people go, my kid's fighting back on this or anything like that?
Yeah, so there are a lot of safeguards built in under Georgia law to make sure the child has a say. So what happens is the child gets notice that this is happening. So they actually get served papers by a sheriff. Some kids think that's cool, some are intimidated. Just depends on the situation, but a sheriff hands them papers, or supposed to hand them papers. And then they are appointed, and they have a few days if they want to hire their own attorney, which pretty much is pretty rare in these
Yeah.
kind of cases. But then if they don't hire their own attorney, the court appoints them an attorney. And so then that attorney's job is to look out for their legal rights. And yes, they can push back, they can object, and they have the right to do that. Typically, most of the special needs guardianships I've done are not contested. In fact, I don't think I've done a contested one in that situation, but sometimes they're contested, and sometimes the person contesting it doesn't get the guardianship.
Yeah. Okay. So what about when people are weighing, is this something that I should do? What are the benefits? What are kind of like a pros and cons kind of thing?
Sure. So the benefit is you have legal paperwork that says I am still the one making decisions for this person. And so it gives a lot of rights to talk to doctors, and that's pretty key. It gives you the right to make healthcare decisions. Like I said, establishing residence and establishing where they go to school, you legally have documentation that says you have the right to do that. So that's very useful. I have seen some. I'm not discouraging anybody from getting a guardianship. I think that's pretty important for most people to do. But I have seen some special needs individuals in their 40s who maybe mom died or mom can't care for them anymore, and so then sister takes over, and they've never had anything in writing, never had a guardianship. So it's not that it's not possible to navigate life without a guardianship, but it just is very beneficial in a lot of cases. The cons are It's an expensive process. So even if you do it on your own and you don't hire an attorney, the court fees are pretty significant. It's around, it's different county by county, but plan on $600.
Okay.
That is just because besides what the court does, they have to pay an attorney to represent the child, and they also have to pay somebody to evaluate the child. And
Okay.
and they have to pay the sheriff's office. And so it's just, a decent amount of other people getting involved, which brings the fees up. Another downside is there are annual requirements. So there's a requirement if you're a guardian to file annual reports. And typically the annual reports aren't bad for a guardian, but, it's an ongoing every year type thing. Also, the court, if you decide you want to change the arrangement, so maybe you want a different guardian or you want to move them out of state or something like that, the court gets involved. And so obviously anytime you get a court involved, it's a little bit more hassle in your life. But so those are probably the biggest downsides.
Okay. So when you think about like the whole, take the medical piece of it. So if somebody, because you do have, there are a ton of programs in Georgia, but all over the country where it's a residential and a day program and services that are, essentially doing all of the care and all that kind of stuff. If you can is there a way that you can get them to sign off saying, you can have access to my health chart and speaking to my doctors without doing guardianship, or do you always need guardianship in order for that to happen?
It's possible. I mean, if it really depends on the child's level of competency. So if the child can understand a HIPAA release, for example. So like, for example, if I want my husband to get my medical records, then I sign a HIPAA release. He takes it, he talks to my doctors, things like that. So if they're able to execute something like that, then they probably don't rise to the level of needing a guardianship. So it's very case specific whether that's needed or whether a HIPAA release could suffice for that.
Yeah. Okay. So let's talk about, so you said the process, and so you're wanting to do it when maybe starting a little bit before that 6 months before they turn 18. If somebody is not going to hire an attorney, where would they even start the process?
So there are a lot of online resources. They could start the process. The paperwork is available online. So there is a stack of papers available online. It's at gaprobate.gov, and there was a petition for guardianship and or conservatorship. And I would say the papers themselves aren't particularly hard to fill out. It's normally where the attorney's value comes in is kind of guiding the process a little bit. So, for example, do two parents need to be co-guardians? That's a good question. It's kind of case specific.
Yeah.
The paperwork can sometimes get a little tricky. Generally, it's not that hard, but it's more like the decisions behind it, I would say. And then it could be helpful to be represented during the hearing. But I have been in cases, I used to be court-appointed attorney for a lot of individuals that their parents were seeking guardianship over them. So I represented quite a few of them. And the courts generally are pretty friendly to people that represent themselves. But, it's always scary to go into a court hearing not knowing what to expect. So sometimes it's oftentimes it's worth hiring that attorney.
Yeah. And if you decide to wait, so if, say your child turns 18 and you go, you know what, I'm not going to do this yet, and then come, 5 years later, can you make the decision at that point to go, okay, maybe this is something that we should do now?
You can do that later. So the risk you always run is that something has come up right away that needs your focus then, that needs you to have a guardianship then. And it's a multiple month process to get a guardianship. Now, there is a procedure to get an emergency guardianship. So if you need it really quickly, but generally whatever's come up in your life, it has to be pretty burdensome to rise to the standard of needing an emergency guardianship. So it has to be a true emergency, not just an emergency for you.
Yeah. And then we also talk about, so we've talked about money a lot through almost all of our interviews. And one of the big topics with financial is people who are on a waiver cannot have a certain amount, like over a certain amount of money. So when it comes to guardianship, is there any benefit there as well, as far as like being in control of their finances more, or does that not really make a difference?
So that's a very good question. So we've only been talking about guardianship so far. The money piece of a guardianship is called conservatorship. And so you do it at the same time as guardianship.
Okay.
And it's the one that gives you the right to manage their money. So the guardianship lets you make decisions for their health, well being, talk to doctors, things like that. If you want to manage their money too, you ask for conservatorship at the same time. And
Okay.
it's kind of a double edged sword. Conservatorship, it does allow you to manage their money, but the reporting requirements to the court are a lot more burdensome. So you have to file an annual report every year that is pretty detailed, and it's more difficult than the annual report for guardianship. There's also a filing fee with that, which the guardianship doesn't have. Normally, I don't think any courts charge an annual fee for filing the guardianship annual reports. And typically, the court also requires you to post a bond. And so that's just an insurance policy that you get that you pay every year to be able to manage the child's money, or
Okay.
I should say, the ward's money. Um, Normally, oftentimes my clients don't get conservatorship in special needs cases. It depends how high functioning they are and if they
Yeah.
have separate assets. If their only income is SSI, normally you don't need a guardianship, or excuse me, a conservatorship to be able to handle that money. You can get that authority from the Social Security Administration.
Okay. And for people who are either doing guardianship or what is it again?
Conservatorship.
Conservatorship.
Yes.
Those annual reports that they're having to do, is that something that they eventually can learn to do on their own, or are you needing an attorney's assistance for that each year as well?
So the guardianship reports, those are easy. You don't need
Okay.
an attorney for those. And typically my clients don't send them to me to look at, even when I've helped them with the guardianship. It's a list of questions. So I think a lot of courts have them online, but it's like, where is your ward living? What's their condition? Has anything changed in the last year? What's their medical condition? Just things like that. It's
Yeah.
basically things you know off the top of your head. The conservatorship reports are a lot more detailed
Yeah.
with
I feel like,
money.
yeah, with money,
Yeah,
always more
yeah,
detailed when it comes to money.
exactly.
Um, okay, so we touched on this a little bit. So you have, I mean, I know a lot of the families I've talked to, you have the mom and the dad. And so how do people make the decision, are they both the guardian? Is just the mom the guardian? Are automatically both of them the guardian if you're filing for it? How does that process work?
So nothing's automatic in guardianship. So it's who's asking for it is generally who's appointed, assuming a good case is made. That's tricky. Legally, if you have co-guardians, they're legally considered two halves of a whole. And so it is possible that, mom might show up at the emergency room with the child with the guardianship papers, and dad might be out of town. And it's possible they wouldn't communicate with mom only because dad's got to be here. He's a part of that guardianship. Now, practically speaking, does that happen often? I can't tell you. I kind of doubt it, but I don't
Yeah.
know. So that's a decision to make. I'll say generally my clients really both want that. When I have a married couple, they generally really both want that authority to act.
Yeah.
Now I've had a couple where there was a significant age difference between mom and dad, and so we appointed
Yeah.
the younger parent only, because if one of the guardians passes away or something happens to them, the court has to get involved because it doesn't just automatically fall to the second one only. It's not a difficult process, but it's if we know that mom's 20 years younger than dad and will be the guardian for a lot longer than dad, maybe it's a decent idea just to name mom.
Yeah.
Also, if one parent's I had a situation, one parent was out of town all the time. And so then we thought it's better not to run the risk. I believe he was a pilot, or he's something where he traveled a lot.
Okay.
We decided it's better not to run the risk that dad will be gone and make him a co-guardian. So we just did mom. But generally my clients want to do both parents.
Yeah. Especially I would think in the case of maybe a divorced couple or a couple that's not married, you probably see them do a lot.
No, I would say actually, divorced couples or couples not married, I see one. Generally, the primary
Okay.
taker is co-guardian. I mean, is primary guardian,
Okay.
just because they, in the case of the divorced couple, generally they probably don't work that well together. They'd probably still be married,
Yeah.
and so generally the primary caretaker is the one that's guardian. I've seen a couple divorced, or more than a couple divorced parents with guardianship, and then we went back to court because one wasn't happy about
Yeah.
the other. So that gets interesting.
Yeah. Um, I think a topic that comes up a lot and is on everyone's mind is, you know, how do I best set up my child for after I'm gone? And so when it comes to guardianship, is it an option? And have you seen siblings take over that guardianship maybe as the parents age or as the parents pass away? What do you see
Yes.
there?
The most recent one I just did a couple weeks ago was that situation exactly. It was mom had cared for son all of his life, but she didn't have a guardianship. She just did it. And then she passed away. And so he needed a guardian. I think there were issues talking with the group home he was living in or something like that. And so one of his siblings stepped up and asked to be guardian.
Okay.
And so I would say it's what I've seen. People tend to not be super proactive and set up guardianship before the parent passed away, but usually after is when it's done.
And is that a long, difficult process? Like, should parents be thinking about that when they are planning for the future? That, maybe once they hit a certain age, go ahead and transfer guardianship to the sibling?
Yeah, so it's if there's a guardianship set up. So if mom or dad or both are officially guardians, then the court has already established a need. Hey, the court's job is determining, one, do they need a guardian, and two, who should it be? So the court's already established a need for guardianship. And so then it's an easier process to get that quote unquote transferred. So it's basically filing papers with the court saying, hey, I want my kids to take over now because I'm getting older. And it's normally not going through a whole hearing again.
Yeah.
Usually maybe an attorney would talk to them or something like that. I
Okay.
guess every court's different how they handle that.
And probably it's just as important to make sure you're having conversations about that. I mean, I know I've personally talked to a sibling whose mom passed away, dad's getting older, and she's kind of going, I don't even know about any of this and stuff. So it's also probably important to come up with a plan for the siblings and have a conversation.
Yeah, so I'm sure that would be greatly appreciated to know, hey, in a few years, I'm expecting you to step in and become guardian of your brother. And that doesn't necessarily have to mean that brother has to live with you or
Yeah.
has to, but you could be the one to speak for him.
And if you're in this situation where you have like an only child, can it be like aunt, uncle? Can it be anybody?
Legally, yes, it could be anybody. So it's whoever asks the court can be appointed. So usually there's some safeguards built in so that the person that you're getting guardianship over, their next of kin have to be notified. So some random stranger can't ask the court without telling anybody in the family, but really a friend could, a family member
Okay.
could. It's there's no rules about who can and can't.
Okay. So another thing that we've talked about a lot, specifically in our therapy segment is, or even with our accountant segment last week, how do I find someone to help me through this process? Because that seems to kind of be a problem in this community is, where are the resources? How can I find the resources? So how would you recommend people find assistance through this process? Can it be any attorney? Does it have to be a specialized attorney? What do you look for?
So I wouldn't say just any attorney. You are specifically looking for an adult guardianship attorney, because you don't know how many calls I get from people that see guardianship on my website and think that I can help them with guardianship for their minor child, maybe a divorce or something that somebody's, something like that.
Yeah.
It's an adult guardianship attorney. And so then once you get that figured out, obviously word of mouth referrals are always your best source. If you have a friend in the situation, or somebody that you think could make a good referral, that's probably your best bet. If not, I'd say, I hate to say this, probably Google's a
Yeah.
good source to find an attorney. Um, I wouldn't say anybody. I would say somebody that's at least done several guardianships before, to have kind of the lay of the land. Just organizations like yours can refer people. The Cobb County Bar Association can refer people. The
Okay.
Georgia Bar Association can make recommendations too.
Okay. And so what about if you are in an area that, maybe you can't find an attorney, or you've tried some and it's not a good fit, but they're in Savannah and you're in Marietta. Is it an option for, especially through COVID and this new like virtual environment, to maybe find an attorney that's based in the city of Atlanta, even though you don't live there? Or do you need somebody specifically in your county?
Well, during COVID, that might have been fine because all of the courts were doing online hearings, and they're all at least the courts I'm acting in, they are transitioning back to in person. And so I would say it's probably better bet to have somebody, maybe not directly in your county, but somewhere close. The issue
Okay.
you're going to run into, so anybody, I can do a guardianship in Savannah, I could do one in Macon, anywhere in the state. But do you want to pay me to drive to Savannah for your hearing? Probably not.
Yeah.
Um, and so it's probably better, the closer you can get, probably the better, just to reduce your costs and travel time and things like that.
Yeah. Is there any, because we talked about if people are navigating this on their own, obviously, if you have the ability to hire an attorney, that's probably going to be the best bet. But you can at least start the process and the paperwork on your own. For people who do not have the ability to pay for an attorney at all, is there any way, like, and this might be a bad question, but it's like if you can't hire an attorney to defend you in like a criminal case, you have like a public defender. Is there any
Sure.
services or options like that for people who can't afford an attorney fee?
That's a good question. There's always the Cobb County Legal Aid, or the legal aid in your county. I don't actually, I do some volunteer work with them, but I don't know their threshold for accepting clients. So it may be, I imagine there's probably a pretty big gap between, clients they'll take and clients that can actually afford an attorney. There's probably that middle area. And so for people in that middle area, I know that the probate court in some counties have clinics and things like that. So it's
Okay.
basically volunteer hours for people to come by with their questions. And I know they take probate cases, but I would assume they would handle guardianship as well. So it's worth exploring. Maybe calling the probate court in your county to ask. And then you could also ask attorneys. Some attorneys are willing to basically sell you an hour of their time and maybe not be the attorney on the case, but answer your questions and look over your paperwork and things like that. That might be an option too. So I think there's probably resources, or no, not probably, there are resources out there to help when you don't want to cough up the cash to pay an attorney to handle it from beginning to end, but there are a couple sticky spots you want to have some questions on.
Yeah. And one thing that we really try to encourage people to do is reach out to us if you do have questions and maybe you can't afford those fees. And we'll try to connect you with a parent who's been through the process, because if they've been through the process, they're probably pretty educated on it.
Yeah, very good. Yeah. Yeah.
So that's always an option. Okay, so something else, we always talk about how every state is so different. So obviously the guardianship process in Georgia is probably going to be different than the guardianship process in like South Carolina.
Yes.
So if you have guardianship of your child in one state, or even if you have guardianship of your child in Georgia and you would like to move, what do those families do?
It's going to depend on the laws of the two states. Probably, hate to say this, you're probably going to get a new guardianship. So
Okay.
if you know for sure that you're moving in a year, if I had a client come in and tell me I'm moving in a year, I want to get guardianship, I'm moving my child out of state, I would say wait unless there's a dire emergency, in which case we can get an emergency guardianship. But I'd probably tell them to wait, because you really don't want to go through the process, get it all wrapped up, and then 6 months later do it again.
Yeah. And what about, do you have to live in the same state? Because also know families that the parents live in one state and their child is in some amazing program in another state. So
No, at least not here. Other states may have that rule. They may require the guardian to live in the same state. Georgia doesn't require that. And one of the most recent guardianships I did was for a mom in California getting guardianship over her son in Cobb County.
okay. And you do it in the state that the child lives in. So if you live in
Yes.
South Carolina, you're getting guardianship in Georgia because your child lives here.
Yes.
Okay. Also confusing, all the states. But we don't want parents to feel like they're limited and stuck in one state because,
Oh no, absolutely not.
So, but it's still probably, that 6-month process. If you are moving, probably something to think about.
Probably, and to be honest, I've seen now things got slowed down during COVID, but in general, with the probate courts in Georgia, they're usually much quicker than what I hear from my clients about probate courts in other states. And so I'd say probably it's gonna be quicker in Georgia to do it, and who knows how long it takes in other states.
Yeah.
I might be wrong, but that's my guess.
Yeah. So one more thing, and then we'll get to the questions. If families are already using, like for their services, for their guardianship, is there anything else that they should be doing when they go through that guardianship process? Like we did talk about, like special need trust or wills and stuff like that. So should they be doing all of this around the same time that they're doing the guardianship process?
So it's not like a legal requirement that they do that, obviously, but it's probably a good idea. And the reason is it's really easy. So I've done it both ways. I've had some clients, they want to update their will or do a special needs trust or something like that. And they say, let's just do it all at the same time. And we've done it that way. I've done that a lot of times, but it's often clients want to focus on one thing and then move on to the next thing. I've done it that way too. The danger is if you do the guardianship and then you wait, the longer amount of time that goes by, the less likely you are. It's hard, it's like anything else. It's hard to get around to. So while it's on your radar, it's probably a good idea to update. And the danger of not doing it is that Georgia law has got an estate plan written for you, even if you don't have one. And so that estate plan probably includes some money going to your special needs child, which will then cause them to lose whatever benefits they've gotten, SSI, Medicaid, whatever.
Yeah.
And so it's probably a good idea to do it around the same time.
And the same attorney can usually do it.
Usually, yeah. Usually, if you have an attorney that's going to do a guardianship, they can. I haven't met many that don't also do that type of estate planning.
Yeah. Okay. I always say, ask. I'm doing this. Should I be doing anything else while I'm going through this process? And I've hired you and I have your time.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. So we're going to go into some questions because we did have quite a few submitted. So if guardianship is uncontested, is it worth the money to hire an attorney? We talked about this a little bit.
That's a good question. I want to say yes, since I'm an attorney,
Yeah.
and I feel like I bring a lot of value to the table. But to be honest, I've seen people pursue guardianship on their own and were successful, and they, to the best of my knowledge, didn't have an attorney assisting them at all. So I've seen it. I like to think that I help head off problems that could arise later on, and also pretty helpful during the hearing and just the communication process between the court, the other attorney, and the judge. But I know guardianships are expensive, so I would say it's better to get one on your own without an attorney than to not have one at all.
Yeah. Okay. And I think it's helpful to know too, if people want to start the process and look to hire an attorney for a piece, or, where you said you can hire somebody for an hour of the time, that's also an option.
Sure.
For people.
That's an option. I think a lot of attorneys prefer to handle it from beginning to end and may not want to come in, but a lot of attorneys will be happy just to give advice, even though they're not officially taking over the case.
Yeah.
I think that's just going to depend on the individual.
Yeah. Okay. So the next question is there a person or service to help guide us? So I guess that would be you.
The attorney, or like I said, I believe there's some counties have probate law clinics that can help. legal aid if the income and assets are below a certain level. I'm not sure what that is. But yes, the attorney is probably the best bet.
Nothing within the school systems though, because they are still in school when they get to that age. So do you know if the school systems help them through that process?
I don't know that. My clients that have had a lot of my clients have had children in school, and I was never made aware of anything like that, but I'm not going to swear that there's not something available in the schools.
Yeah. Okay. Um, Another question, I think this is a really good question. What are the deadlines, or are there any deadlines? So we know you said start the process. You can't even file paperwork till 6 months before their 18th birthday. But other than that,
Right. There's not a deadline to get it started. So if you come in to the court when the special needs individual is 32, and suddenly when a guardianship, the court may ask why now, but there's no deadline there. I see guardianships ranging from 17 and a half to people in their 90s. So
yeah. Okay. And then you did say too, the process takes about 6 months. Is that right? From beginning to end?
maybe a little less. So it's under Georgia law, there are kind of some strict things that have to happen. So we file papers, they get served, they have a period to hire an attorney, and then there's an evaluation, and the evaluator has a certain amount of days to get their report in, and then they set a hearing date. So I would say the ones I've been doing lately have been several months.
Okay. A lot shorter than most of the processes in this community.
Yes, I would agree.
So this is kind of on the subject of deadlines too. Is there a general timeline available to help special needs parents navigate the services available from birth to adulthood? We are trying to help provide that. So I'll go ahead and throw that in there. It's something that we're working on getting together. But I mean, it's a good question. There's a lot of things that have to happen.
That's a very good question. I don't know of anything, to be on any timeline. There's probably one out there. I don't know of one.
Yeah. So I know, because we talk a lot about, okay, so you have the guardianship at this age and you can get on the wait list for waiver at this age, and, start your IEP at this age and all this kind of stuff. So we hear that is a constant battle for parents. So we definitely are working on that kind of resource for you guys.
Yeah, I never thought about that, but that's a good point. I don't get involved until 17 and a half, unless I'm doing a special needs trust or something like that. But that, that's just, there's no deadlines for that. So,
yeah. Well, it's tough. It's definitely tough. Well, Sarah, any other, tell us a little bit maybe about your office and what services you provide. I always like to educate parents. Obviously you help families with adult guardianship. Other ways possibly that they could come to utilize your services?
Sure. So probably two ways. Most people utilize my services, the adult guardianship, and it's probably 80% of what I do is estate planning. So
Okay.
that would include planning for families with special needs children. So that's things like wills, trusts, powers of attorney, healthcare directives, HIPAA releases, all kinds of things that people need.
Yeah. Okay. And I personally have seen you recommended on multiple Facebook groups. I know people commented and said, "Oh my gosh, I use Sarah. I'm so excited for this interview."
Oh, wonderful. Well, I hope I didn't disappoint.
Yeah, no, very helpful. So thank you so much for your time. We will continue to find hot topics. Let us know who you guys want to hear from next, what you would like to see covered, and we will see you all next time.